Hi everyone, and welcome to this virtual lecture, How to Make Usain Bolt Faster. There'll be a live talk by Wes, Steve and Mark, and during this presentation, please feel free to ask any questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And at the end of the presentation, I'll ask the questions to the team. But without further ado, I'll now pass over to Wes, Steve and Mark.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Middlesex University's live open day. Just introduce who's on the call. So first we've got Mark Richardson, who is the programme leader for the BSc in Sport and Exercise Rehabilitation. We've got Steve Williams, who oversees the BSc in Sport and Exercise Science. Then there's myself, and I look after the physical education and coaching pathway. We also do have a strength and conditioning strand, which is Mike Edwards, but he's not on this call today, and he sends his apologies for that. So what we're going to do today is we are going to go through how a typical lecture may look, but we're going to try and encompass all aspects of sports science. So how does rehab, sports science, strength conditioning, PE and coaching, and some of the psychology, how is that all integrated to promote or enhance athletic performance? So there's a case study that we're going to present to you, hopefully, like I say, showing all facets of sport and exercise science. So we're going to look at the science of sprinting, right? And how can we try and look to break the 100-meter world record. So initially we're going to watch a video, and I'm sure you've all seen it before, and then from there Mark will kick us off by looking at this via a sort of rehabilitative aspect. Oh, where's my video gone? Yeah. There we are. So we're going to look into the 9.58 seconds, absolutely rapid and yet to be beaten legally. So from there, we're going to look today at the science of sprinting in relation to looking at movement screening and injury prevention, which Mark will cover. Steve will then join in and look at the biomechanics of sprinting and performance programming. And I will bring in around sort of looking at the technique, the coaching points, and some sort of psychological elements to think about going forward. So Mark, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Wes. So initially, we're looking at our athlete who wants to break 100-meter record. So we need to be understanding what potential injuries or potential musculoskeletal problems that could affect our athlete's performance. So typically, common running injuries, we can have lower back pain, hamstring injuries, knee issues, tendonitis, calf strains. So in order, as a rehab specialist, we need to do our athlete screening, which is looking at all functions of the body and finding out if there's any possible areas of tightness, weakness, asymmetry that could be affecting our athlete's performance. So if you go on the next slide, please, Wes. So part of our role as a rehabber will be looking at a postural analysis. This is part of what we call our subjective and objective assessments. So we're looking at overall symmetry of the body, looking at muscle tightness, looking at the overactive, underactive muscles, muscle length, etc., just to see if there's anything untoward that could be affecting our athlete's performance. So we're looking at habitual movement patterns. Things that could be affecting that is daily living, the occupation, if they're seated for long periods of time, or they've been doing lots of activity which could be causing this imbalance across the body. Altered movement patterns, if they're one-sided, if they're dominant or not. Altered movement patterns from injury. So we need to know if there's any previous past medical history. Now, with an athlete of this capability, he's probably had some injuries in the past. We need to be aware of that, but also what's the rehab been? Have they rehabbed injuries? If not, was it incorrect rehab? Was it good rehab? This could be affecting our athlete's performance. Muscle inhibition or overactivity. So sometimes, particularly with certain activities and training, certain muscles groups are used more than others, and we want to try and accommodate that and make it more equal across the body. And altered movement patterns from, like I mentioned before, injury or surgery. Has there a build up of scar tissue? If so, can we address that to make them more functional? Hit the next slide, please, Wes. So whilst us doing this, is looking at them holistically, so looking at them, looking at their asymmetry. Are their muscles similar? Are their muscle length, bony landmarks? is it all generally equal? I mean, not everyone is symmetrical, but we want to have a kind of a normal kind of movement screen and analysis. Another thing we can look at is what we've got up on the screen here is called the functional movement screen. This is a sequence of movements that we can get the athlete to perform, and it helps us identify if there's any kind of asymmetry or any muscle weaknesses that we need to work on. So you can see here, this tool, we get them to perform a deep squat, a hurdle step, an inline lunge, looking at shoulder mobility, an active straight leg raise, trunk stability push-up, and rotary stability. And you can see here on the slide that if they're insufficient in any of these movement patterns, it gives us an indication of areas that we need to work on in order to make them functionally stronger and performing better. So you can see these movement patterns here, and they are graded from 0 to 3. So you can see you've got the squat, the hurdle step, the lunge. And it's quite easy for us to perform this on our athlete. And this is in conjunction with other aspects of our assessment. So we would have been feeling how the joint's moving, feeling if any muscle tightness, any instability, any laxity of ligaments, any strength deficits, etc. Putting it all together to get an overall understanding of how our athlete currently is within their kind of functional health. So the next slide looks at how we grade it. So again, if it's 0 is given to the individual has pain during any part of the movement, leading up to 3, where the individual can perform the movement without any compensations according to the established criteria. So again, it's a nice functional measure. We've got some baseline data. So for argument's sake, for some of the movements they perform a 1 or 2, there's some areas that we can work on to make them better, reassess them to see whether or not they're improving, and helps them perform that functional ability. And this coincides with other things we may have picked up, length discrepancies, muscle strength discrepancies, muscle lengthening, movement patterns, etc. So once we've identified anything that we need to work with in order to try to help improve our athlete's performance, we can go about addressing it. So that's another part of what a rehab would do. So we've identified the problems, and if you hit the next slide, Wes, there's loads of things that we will teach in the course on how to address these issues. So one thing is trying to facilitate muscle activation. So if they're weak post-injury or post-surgery with scar tissue, particularly within the hamstrings, which is an important muscle within sprinting, we can try and address that with certain techniques. It might be soft tissue techniques such as massage. We use tool therapy. We might be needing electrotherapy. And you can see here that we could address some muscle activation issues with the use of kinesio tape, which many of you may have seen on professional athletes in many sporting environments. But just ways of what we can do to help address any kind of biomechanical, anatomical issues which could affect our athlete sprinting. So once we've kind of established that, we'd obviously reassess to see whether or not our athlete is better at performing the task at hand, i.e. the sprinting. We can also use the functional movement score again to see if the scores have improved. And again, it kind of works as a prehab tool as well. There may not be any underlying issues identified, but it's a good tool for us to use and good baseline data to keep our athlete healthy and functional throughout the task ahead. And it's leading on to other exercises they can perform. So you hit the next slide, Wes. So again, we might address these issues that we found with some rehab and corrective exercises, or if we haven't found any real issues to deal with, we want to maintain a level of strength and stability, core stability, etc. So we'll be prescribing these exercises relevant to what our sprinter will require to make sure they can get the best out of their performance. And then if they're performing in a kind of rehab way, anatomically and biomechanically, it then leads on to the other areas which will be addressed by Steve and Wes.
All right, thanks, Mark. Okay, I'm going to go through the biomechanical analysis of a sprinter. So what we mean by biomechanics essentially is looking at the way they move. And a 100-meter race is super simple. It's a straight line, so we're going to be looking at linear speed. So we can kind of define linear speed at the rate at which we move. And if we wanted to make it as easy as possible to think about, what we're doing is we're applying as much force into the floor in order to run as fast as possible. But what's really important is that we have the right application of force going into the floor. Because as you know, like if you have a lot of vertical force, you can jump high. If you have a lot of horizontal force, you can jump further. And essentially, a 100-meter race is just a series of jumps. Putting into a correct technique, a biomechanical technique, can get someone to run 100 meters as fast as possible. So if we have a look at the phases of a race, although like I said, it's very straightforward, it's a straight line sprint, the race itself is split up into 3 phases. And during these 3 phases, different biomechanical applications are occurring. So the first phase would be known as the acceleration, the drive phase. This is the phase where the athlete comes out of the block. Obviously, the idea is to come out of the blocks as explosive as possible and accelerate up until top flight velocity. So this usually occurs between 0 to 30 meters. You want to be accelerating up to about 30 meters. We'd expect our athlete to reach their maximal velocity, top speed. And the idea of the best sprinters out there is to maintain that top speed for as long as possible. So literature kind of says between 30 meters to 60 meters, an athlete will be able to maintain their top speed. And then the last 40 meters of the race will be all to do with speed maintenance. During speed maintenance, what we're expecting as sports scientists is to see our athlete actually decelerate. And what the difference between the best sprinters and the slightly less best sprinters are the sprinters that can decelerate the less. So if an athlete decelerates less than another athlete, they're being able to maintain their speed for longer. So these are the 3 different phases, and then I'm going to go through the force application of those phases. So we can break it up into acceleration phase, exploding out of the block, up until the maximal velocity phase. So this is a nice slide showing what research suggests is the largest contribution to the success of a 100-meter race. So as you can see, there's a huge contribution. It's saying that 64% of the race can be determined from how well someone accelerates out of the block. So this, as a sports scientist, gives us a great idea that exploding out of the blocks is going to be key to the success of a 100-meter runner. Then you can see the other variables that we have on the slide is the rest of the contribution made up of how successful a 100-meter runner is. However, if we went back to watch that video of Usain Bolt do the 100 meters, I'm sure you guys can find that on Google, you'll notice that Usain Bolt's explosiveness out of the block isn't as good as some of the other runners. He actually comes out of the block about 7th place during his world record. So this gives us an indication that actually Usain Bolt isn't a typical sprinter. He doesn't have the typical attributes that other sprinters have. He doesn't have his main contribution of the race coming from exploding out of the blocks. He's actually better at getting up into top flight velocity, getting faster than other athletes and being able to maintain that top flight velocity for longer than the other athletes he's racing against. He's more chasing them down than getting out and gaining an advantage at the beginning. If you go to the next slide. So if we're thinking about the start of the race, exploding at the blocks is going to be a key performance factor for a sprinter. We need to break this down biomechanically into, well, what is the body position of our sprinter that allows them to come out of the blocks as efficiently as possible? So we can break this down to 2 key components. The 2 that I've shown on this slide will be the athlete's shin angle, which we're saying would be an optimal of 24 degrees, and a center of mass angle coming out of the blocks between 45 to 44 degrees. So this is all well and good. So we can study athletes and go, okay, we want their body position to be in this state, to be as efficiently as possible in order to explode out the box, out of the blocks as efficiently as possible. But how can we achieve this? Well, on the next slide, it shows it's all to do with the ground reaction force that an athlete puts into the floor. So like I said at the very beginning, the larger force we apply to the floor, the better we are in terms of speed. But this has to be put into the correct application. So this is known as our resultant force. So we can just break this down into a contribution of horizontal forces and vertical forces. If we're applying the perfect amount of contribution of vertical and horizontal, we can allow our bodies to explode out the blocks at that desired 44 degrees with the correct 22-degree shin angle also. If we go to the next slide, we can break that down even further, just to kind of give you a bit more of a visual idea of how us as sports scientists can measure this. if you can see, the person in the top picture is in a much stronger position in terms of accelerating out of the blocks. We know that the person, the top biomechanical model, will be able to apply larger amounts of acceleration compared to the bottom model. The reason being, the bottom model is applying way too much vertical force in the first instance, which is driving their center of mass at a much higher angle than is desired, meaning they're going to lose a lot of force production in the direction that you want to go. Obviously, we need to apply large amounts of horizontal force when we're accelerating, but we still need quite a large contribution of vertical force in order for a body to be propelled forward. Because like I said, running is just a series of jumps, but series of jumps in the correct direction with not too much vertical force, but enough vertical force in order to propel our body forwards in the center of mass that we require. If we go on to the next slide, if you come to measure these forces, we can do this in the lab. We can put these into the track. You guys come to Middlesex next year in the West End. We have these force plates in our running tracks. And the way they work is it shows us the contribution of force that's put into the ground, known as our ground reaction forces. The force plates themselves measure force in 3 axes. They give you a vertical force. They give you your 2 horizontal forces, your medial, lateral, anterior, posterior. So if we're breaking this down into real simple terms, like I said, we need a contribution of vertical force to push our bodies up and horizontal force to push our bodies forwards. So I think I've got 2 arrows literally just highlighting the application of force as we click through the slides. Okay, so these 2 lines here is an indication of if I was to push into the force plate of my foot, we can see that the line that's more horizontal is going to be beneficial to accelerating compared to the line that's got a lot of vertical force. This is shown a little bit clearer in our next slide, which is just keep going through all of these. So we've got all these triangles. So the way we can actually measure our force production is if we was to push into a force plate, we could see the contribution of vertical force compared to horizontal force. Like we can see with these 2 triangles here, we can just use Pythagoras just to work this out. And we can see that actually the resultant force from both of these force outputs is the same, but the contribution of the force is a lot more beneficial in the top picture for someone accelerating out of the blocks compared to the force application when someone's at top speed. So like I said, it's just a 100-meter race in a straight line, but the contribution of forces is completely different between the first 0 to 30 meters compared to the maximal speed between 30 to 60 and then the speed maintenance. And then if we move on, hopefully we've got a profile of the body position changing. So like I said, between 0 to 30, the center of mass of the individual is continually changing through their foot strides. There's large horizontal forces pushing their body forwards. And as the athlete comes along the track and gets up to their maximal velocity, the body position of the athlete has completely changed. Again, the body position of the athlete changes because the application of force has changed. The application of force is very reliant on the horizontal force production during acceleration phase, and then very reliant on vertical force during the maximal velocity phase. That's quite a nice visual, just how the body changes. And then the next slide is a nice visual showing the force profile. So if we can just envisage the first section here being a contribution of a horizontal and vertical force, we can see how the green line changes. There's less and less contribution of that horizontal force up until we get into top flight. And then we go into a much larger reliance on vertical force. Essentially, when we're at top speed, our change in velocity is 0. So our acceleration is 0. And we're just trying to maintain that top speed by having large vertical forces, and we're having an equal contribution of horizontal force from a decelerative to an accelerative phase. If I try to talk through this slide and make sense of it in 30 seconds, hopefully it will make sense. As the green line goes up and above the neutral line at the bottom, that's all positive horizontal force. As we start to speed up, we can see the green line actually starts coming down below that neutral line. And that's because at each foot contact, we're having a decelerative phase followed by a propulsive phase. And if you notice on the very last picture, the area under the neutral line and the area over the neutral line is equal, meaning that we have the exact same decelerative horizontal force as we do positive horizontal force, meaning someone's running at constant speed. And then there's a large vertical force as someone's bounding down the track. So hopefully what you should take away from this slide is large reliance on horizontal forces during acceleration. And as the athlete goes up into top speed, there's not a large reliance on horizontal force anymore. That's taken over by a vertical force. If we just move on to the next slide, we can see these two videos. We've got someone doing a counter movement jump. So how high can you jump is the top picture, and a broad jump, which is how far can you jump at the bottom picture. So if we know this from a sports science point of view, the contribution of horizontal and vertical forces and how they have an impact on someone in a running race, we should know that the top picture is going to be important for the maximal velocity phase of the run, and the bottom picture is going to be important for the accelerative phase of the run. So if we were testing our athlete, we've got a sprinter, we might carry out these two tests just to see how they perform, how much vertical force they can produce, how much horizontal force they can produce. And if their numbers aren't looking very high compared to normative values or compared to their peers in their same sprint race, we can then try and change that by increasing their horizontal or vertical force with some training implications. I think if we go on to the next slide, that if we click the two buttons, I think that just highlights what I just said there. The vertical force is top flight, the broad jump is more for the acceleration phase. So if we know that we need to apply that much force, and we know we've got two tests, so we can see how well those athletes perform those tests, then we might have some recommendations for the strength and conditioning coaches to actually make some implementations in order for someone to be able to improve their horizontal force production. So this first graphic, this table here, just shows that, okay, I know that my ground contact time is important for acceleration and maximum velocity, but there's a large reliance on horizontal forces, which means I need to have long contact times as I accelerate out the blocks. As I get up to maximal velocity, my ground contact time is going to be a lot shorter. So if I know that as a sports scientist, I've carried out some tests to see where my athlete fits, then I can then come up with some recommendations. So on my next slide, these are just some quite straightforward recommendations that you could provide. If I need to improve my athlete's acceleration, that's going to be my main emphasis. Then I need to think, right, horizontal force production is important. That means I need to have long ground contact times. That means I need to influence the training in that way. So if you did resisted sprinting, that's going to manipulate an athlete being able to not bound along the floor, meaning they spend longer on the floor, meaning that their horizontal force production is going to be worked upon. Again, if we change the angle of the surface you're running on, so we just don't take them down a flat track, maybe start doing some hill sprints. You can't bound up a hill. You have to manipulate the body to have longer ground contact times, meaning you're working horizontally. Conversely to that, if we're looking at max velocity, we might look at doing speed bounding down the track where we're looking to promote large amounts of vertical force and we're more neglecting the horizontal phase. So although these are from the same race, depending on which part of the race you're working on might influence the strength conditioning plan that you provide your athlete. As you can see, you can split these up into the two phases, but there's some general strength conditioning exercises that will have a positive effect on both the acceleration and max velocity, like your clean and snatch, some of your Olympic lifts, explosive power, weightlifting processes, because essentially, obviously, the acceleration and max velocities consist of the same race. So this is how you could split up the sections and also work with both sections at the same time. I think that leads us on after that slide to Wes.
Thanks, Steve. So as Steve has already alluded to, we know Usain Bolt has, a poor start. So these are things that we go, right then, where can we capitalize on looking to break this world record. So, we're going to look at it from a coaching science aspect. So coaching science is, we're looking at, I guess, the types of cues or the strategies, the coaching points, the teaching styles you utilize, but also encompasses some of the psychological elements around sort of learning theories. How do people learn or take on instructions? So we're going to consider this again as an advantage to try and break this world record. So in that world record, it took Usain Bolt, I think it was 42 and a half, maybe, let's round up, 42 to 43 steps to complete 100 meters. All right, I think on average, you're looking at, 42 to 43 steps to complete the 100 meters. I think on average, we're looking at 47 to 49 steps for the rest of sort of the chasers, as it would be. So things to think about would be, and as Steve alluded to earlier, sort of the shin angles that we need to think about. Can we coach our athletes to start getting the right angles when they're coming out of the blocks? The torso angle. Yeah, ideally we want everything within a sort of a 24 to 45 degree lean. All right, so remember, every action has a reaction. If we can drive into that sort of midpoint between the horizontal and vertical force, we're going to come out in a nice strong position. Again, can we work on our stride length and our stride frequency? Because again, these are things that we can use, to get through the distance as quickly as possible. Every time we are making contact with the floor, there is an element of deceleration. All right. So the less time we spend on the floor, the quicker we're going to be, ideally, or in practice anyway. So it means the contact we have on the floor, it needs to be quick, but it needs to be powerful or forceful as well. So that's how the biomechanics and the strength conditioning starts to lead itself towards sort of the coaching aspect as well, and understanding how to make our athletes faster, not just 100 meters or 200 meters, but your team sport athletes, footballers, netballers, they want to get faster. These are some of the things we can think of. This is exactly the breakdown of the race. All right, so max velocity, as Steve spoke about, we have the initial drive acceleration phase up to 30 meters, and then from 30 meters onwards is your max velocity and speed maintenance. And we have there the different shin angles, the torso of Usain Bolt. We know, let's say, there's a poor start, so we need to think, right, I don't think my circles work there. There we are. We know, right, then first 30 meters, if we can get our athlete, our potential world record, person that we want to train, if we can work on that element, then hopefully we might be able to open up a bit of a further lead, and ideally, look to break that 9.58 seconds in a legal fashion. Obviously taking into account headwind or wind assisted racing from there. So we are going, right then, what can we do? We've looked at the biomechanical aspects, we've looked at the strength and conditioning, we've nailed them, we've sorted that. It's now going, right then, me as a coach, as a PE teacher, what is it that I need to do to ensure that I can give the information correctly to, get the best out of my athlete? So what we have is attentional focus or cueing strategies. All right. And it's basically, I'll go through the definition and I'll try and break it down. So it's the conscious effort of an individual to focus their attention through explicit thoughts or, an effort to execute motor skill with superior performance. So basically it's me thinking, going, right, I need to ensure that I, and then depending on what the coaching point is, I triple extend through the hip, knee and ankle, or I explode like a rocket. And then play on words will give us different outputs. And we're going to look at some of the research around what you say actually matters and will give you a desired outcome, right? But initially, cueing aspect or coaching aspects and cues allow us to focus our attention to the most important. Yeah. So in sprinting, there's going to be 10, 20, maybe even 30 coaching points throughout. Expecting somebody to remember all that is it's quite tough. All right, especially when all they want to do is just get out of the blocks as quickly as possible. The last thing they want to be thinking about is, right, I need to triple extend. I need to extend at my hip, my knee, my ankle. Yeah, I need to do this with my arms. I need to do this with my head position. It's a lot to be thinking about when you try to break the world record. All right, so we want to go, right then, how can we ensure we maximize performance output whilst trying to limit what they are thinking about? All right, and there's different ways we can cue our strategies. We have internal cueing, and we also have external cueing. All right. So from there, internal cueing, this basically is a focus of attention towards the body itself and the movements that the body internally deals with. So it would be, as we can see from the arrows there, the hip on the far side is fully locked out. The knee and the leg is straight. The toes are driving down. So we've got that nice long straight leg from hip down to ankle. That would be triple extension. Sometimes athletes or beginners in any exercise don't understand what triple extension means. Yeah, you know, flexion, extension, circumduction. You've gone through that in your previous study, A level, BTEC, GCSE. Yeah, you know, the tough things to remember. All right, and working with some of the athletic population, they may not understand that. So it's going, right then, how can we play on our words to maximize our performance? So we'll go away from the anatomical references. All right. And from there, we will look at some external cueing strategies. All right. An external focus is when we start to direct ourselves to the outcome. Yeah. So the external stimulus, the events outside the body, what is the outcome? All right. So you know, using these action words. Right. So instead of saying, "Oh, right, you need to triple extend or extend at the hip, knee, and ankle," like, why? Just say explode like a rocket. From there, if someone say explode like a rocket, you're going to push as fast and as powerful as you can, or make yourself as tall or as long as you can. If you do that, again, you're going to get that triple extension movement. But we all know how to make ourselves as tall as possible. We all know how to, you know, explode like a rocket, you know, take off like an aeroplane. We're going to get that nice drive. Again, these are things to think about, apply on words. And there's lots of research to support the importance of external cueing. So there was a review paper by Wolf, and if you do anything around sort of external or attention focus, he does a lot, or is, you know, sort of a big researcher in this area. And what they found, over 80 papers, 80 experiments, they found those interventions that used an external focus, so used coaching points that relied on the action and not the bodily movement itself, actually increased performance output. Okay, and just a nice paper to look at was this one. I think it was 2017 it was. And as you can see here, those that were given an external focus, so explode like a rocket, you know, imagine you're playing on a runway and you're just taking off, so you're driving out and then you're coming up. They found that they were actually quicker in terms of total time over the acceleration phase. Their reaction time out of the blocks, yeah, was way quicker for the external. So those that, like I say, explode like a rocket, or, you know, knee, smash the glass with your knee, as opposed to those that had to internally focus, which was, you know, triple extended the hip, knee, ankle. All right. So we already know just to play on our words as a coach will allow us now to become quicker at the blocks. All right. So from there, what we say actually has a big importance in, you know, getting what we want. Right? We don't want to give lots and lots of coaching points. Lots of information goes in one ear, it goes out of the other. Right? So how can we keep it, you know, simple and effective, and something that they can relate to? All right. Some of the key words we can use. All right. So we've got acceleration, and then, you know, we've got max velocity. We're not going to look at the max velocity just yet. We want to work on that a bit out of the blocks into the first 30 meters. Yep. So big keywords like we want to push out, yeah, drive, or explode. Explode's a really good one, all right, because we know it's a big, big action. All right. And from there, you get a nice big output. Yeah. Explode off the blocks, drive hard. Yeah. Imagine, you know, anything, explode like a rocket, whatever you need to do. Imagine, you know, explode like you're being chased like by a dog. All right. Everybody's being chased by a dog, you run pretty quickly. All right. So again, things that people can relate to, but know what the outcome is. And understanding this also links in nicely with the psychology of how people learn and understand, all right, and taking on information from that point. So I'd say that's just some of the research that supports, you know, what we say matters. All right. So thinking again about everything we've gone through so far, how are we going to get that first 30 meters to break the world record? We've now know sort of, you know, the injury identification, how we're going to reduce the chances of injury. All right. How are we going to, you know, what do the movements and angles look like, the forces that we need to produce and in what direction? Then how can we write a strength conditioning program, and what are the coaching points we're going to give to our athlete to try and get out the blocks early, and then, you know, from there maintain that speed into, you know, a world record breaker. All right. So to sort of finish off here, Right, what we've given you is just some nice, simple underpinning theory around, how we would envisage breaking the 9.58 seconds. Obviously, it's not as simple as being, done in 35 minutes worth of delivery. There's a lot more to look at, right? But it shows the importance of an interdisciplinary approach. So understanding, even if you're just on a PE coaching pathway, just understanding what are some of the common injuries within sprinting or athletics or performance or sport in general, and how can we reduce that through activation, taping strategies or movement screening. Understanding then the forces required to execute a certain movement, and then how do we make our athletes fitter, faster, stronger. And then from there, how do we know what we're saying is effective? Okay, and from there, can you now apply it? Yep, so you now test that approach, and did you get the results you want to work with? So it just shows, whilst you come to us and you may just do one pathway, a rehab program, or the S&C pathway, or the SES, the PE coaching, whatever happens, there will always be a link and an interdisciplinary approach to ensure you always get a full rounded experience and understand what it takes to enhance performance at any level in any sport. From there, again, as we would always expect, especially when you come to university, is to have a reference list. All right, so this is just some of the research that we've utilised within this presentation. And if you wanted to do any further reading, then you could go read some of these studies in more detail from there. And this is stuff that we would advocate you guys to do there. But otherwise, any questions, then the floor is open, and Mark, Steve, and myself will try our best to answer them for you there. You can either type in the Q&A box, or please don't be shy. If you can sort of share your microphone, please do so.
I just want to say a huge thank you to all three of you, because that was a really amazing presentation. Very insightful, very informative. Oh, and we have a question.
Right, I've got two there. What is the fastest sprint time for a 17-year-old boy? That's quite a big question. I don't know every single world record. We know the male and female one. For a 17-year-old, you're probably going to have to Google that one. I couldn't tell you. You could find some normative data, which would tell you, which would be broken down by age. But yeah, off the top of our heads, we don't know what the fastest sprint time is for a 17-year-old boy, or I certainly don't anyway. Steve and Mark, I'm going to probably say you guys won't know that either, unless Steve's having a Google, I don't know. So yeah, sorry, Jerry, you might have to do that one yourself. And if you come and join us, come and tell us what you found out. Megan, would the sports science course S&C help me prepare for the UKSCA assessment? Yes, it will. All right. So we will give you as much information to support you with that. We do have links with the UKSCA. We are currently looking to map our S&C program to SIMSPA, which is a Chartered Institute of, I can't remember what it is, sport and medical something. I can't remember fully what it is. But otherwise, yeah, everything you do, especially in the undergraduate for S&C, has a similar theme to that of the UKSCA assessment. So you'll have your case studies, which is part of it. You've got your weightlifting, plyometrics, speed, agility, all covers them aspects as well. So everything that we assess you on will give yourself a nice sort of pathway into that UKSCA assessment as well. Cheers, Josh, for finding that. Arian Knighton is the fastest 17-year-old. Wonderful. What are some breathing cues required to maximize speed? Well, what you'll find is if you watch anybody who's done sprinting, they will typically not breathe. They will hold the breath and go, because most people can hold the breath for 10 seconds. It's the last thing they'll think of. They'll probably take a deep breath, hold, and drive. Might not breathe till the end, but yeah, if you watch a slow-mo from a face on, you'll find that most of them will hold their breath and drive out. Any other questions? Hello there. Is this part of what is covered in the sports rehab BSc. Mark, I'll let you cover that one. Mute, Mark, you're on mute.
As part of what's covered in the, I'm just looking at, is this part of what's covered in sports rehab, as in the breathing mechanics and everything? So if it is regarding the sprinting, it has an element, like Wes has mentioned, it is crossover. Sports rehab is more a case of identifying injuries and problems. So again, if there is an issue, let's just say with the respiratory system and breathing mechanics, it could be a musculoskeletal issue that you will get taught the skills on how to identify it and treat it, whether it be spinal mobilizations, stretching, strengthening exercises, breathing exercises, diaphragm exercises. So it could be a number of things causing that we could address, find, and treat.
From there, Mark, if you want to stay on, Jerry's got a question which will probably cover your aspect as well, I think.
Proprioception to speed. Yes, obviously proprioception is where a sense of where your body is in space. So yes, you do need, and that probably links to the ground reaction force, etc. So what Steve was talking about. So you need to have good balance and proprioception in order to be the kind of the best, most functional and dynamic movement patterns possible. So like we mentioned in the presentation, we could identify that if there's balance and proprioceptive deficiencies in our athlete, we could then work on addressing that, and hopefully that will kind of link into the kind of the performance, the ground reaction force, etc. And then leading on to what Wes was saying about cues and how to kind of make that ground contact time even more efficient.
Next one from there is Megan. Where do the S&C students typically gain employment after they finish? Does the uni have specific strong links? We have quite a few students who, do tend to go down the sort of the personal training route. And we have links with sort of many of the big companies, and we also have a big gym at the university as well. So we have quite a few students who go on and get employment with that. We also have students, depending on sort of the level and where they're at. We've literally just got an internship that's just come through with Tottenham Hotspur within their boys academy. So there's an internship that's going in there for a graduate. We have a lot of private school stuff as well, which is getting bigger and bigger. So getting into private education is always a good thing from a S&C aspect. Even rehabilitation is getting big there, and then obviously you've got your P and coaching from that. So yeah, we've got quite a few links. If you go onto the website for that specific S&C pathway, you'll find a lot more information around the sort of placement and industry employability routes that program has from there. Steve Millie's got a question, I think, for your program. What are the main components of a sports science course?
I suppose the core components of a sports science course would be your biomechanics, physiology, and psychology. There'd be your three main components, but there's also other subcomponents that you'll be looking at, such as performance analysis, nutrition, research analysis, etc. I think the main thing to mention with sports science is it's very broad. You can go down many different routes, and we try to give you as much of a broad experience as possible, and you can taper your interests more as you progress, especially in year 3 with dissertations, etc., down to the component that you're most interested in. But yeah, the core components of physiology, biomechanics, and psychology. I'm a sports scientist, and I went down physiology and biomechanics. I am not very strong with sports psychology, so that's kind of how it works.
Next one.
Roll.
Yeah, so 11.95, pretty good. How can I reduce the time? Watch back over the last 35 minutes presentation, and you'll be able to get pretty quick that way. So lift heavy, then lift fast. Jump high, jump far, work on your technique, and from there, you should be pretty quick from there. Next one, does diet play a major role in athletic performance and injury prevention? Yeah, we need to be fueled. If not fueled, you're going to tire quickly. That means you're going to be fatigued. Then there's a greater risk of injury from that point. Also, again, if you're fatigued, concentration levels drop. Again, reducing technical output, whether it's in a team sport, whether it's an individual sport, whether it's sprinting, things falter under lack of concentration, fatigue. So diet plays a massive role from that. Also, we know recovery. Again, if you don't refuel, it's going to take you longer to recover, which means then your subsequent training session may not be as as good as it needs to be or should be, and therefore you set yourself back a day, a week, whatever it may be. So yeah, diet plays a huge role in athletic performance, being fueled, and also the ability to refuel and hydrate always comes in there. Ankle eversion and inversion are important for linear sprinting, right? Depends on the surface. I mean, Mark could jump in soon, but I'm sure it'll be depending on the surface. But again, if you've got a weak ankle, whether it's inversion, eversion, or what, then your ground contact time is going to be a little bit longer because you're not going to be strong in that complex. Therefore, you're going to be a little bit slower. I'll let you, Mark, you can answer as well that first question. I'm happy to jump on for the second part.
Yeah, no, it also leads into the, like we're saying, the environment you're running in. Some athletics tracks are on a camber. So you need that kind of ankle inversion, eversion. The foot is a mobile joint. So again, leading back to our proprioceptive awareness, you need to have that kind of good movement pattern within the foot. One for stability, other thing for proprioception. You need that level of flexibility as well to propel yourself forward and for speed. Going to the second question about Nordics. Nordics are kind of like an eccentric loading exercise. You need a lot of control, and they are very difficult to perform. And again, it leads into Wes would probably take onto it. You need good kind of cueing in order to perform it correctly. There are ways of progressing and regressing that exercise. Other hamstring exercises, plenty out there. You can have that static, dynamic, deadlifts, leg curls, using a Swiss ball, resistance, isometric exercises. So it really depends on what you want to achieve, but also there are many different alternatives because, again, Nordics are very hard to perform. I don't know if Wes wants to add to that. Yeah, no, it is. It's quite a complex movement, and I think sometimes they get integrated into programs too early because sort of any eccentric loading is quite a demand anyway. Sometimes I think they get in there and it falters the technique. What you'll find is more people will start to break at the hip too early, so they'll be nice and slow, and then they'll just collapse at the longest length, and that's what we need to work at, especially in sprinting. We know the hamstring usually pops when it's at its longest length, and that's because it's at the weakest, and we don't work within them ranges. So sometimes what most people will do will be sort of more isometric training at longer length. So there's other exercises which can be used, and then Nordics would be there and they have their place 100%, but it wouldn't be the be all and end all of an exercise. Megan, will a new building for sports science at StoneX be open for September? Yes, we went and looked at it last Thursday, and it looks like at the moment it's just the shell. But the rooms and views and everything looks amazing. We've seen the computer, the virtual graphics of it, and it's going to be amazing. We should hopefully be in there. I can't remember the date, but we will be in there for week 1 teaching 100%. We will be in there teaching. So we will be there. I can't remember if it's early September when it'll be fully kitted out. I can't remember the exact date. I don't know if you two can remember.
Be there by September for sure.
But yeah, we will be in there for teaching week 1. We'll be the only ones in there week 1. I think nursing joins week 2 or 3, I think they said, because we're the first floor, we start there. Should you do heavy lifting before or after sprinting? There's a lot of context needed for that question. If you just do one sort of big or a 3-rep heavy squat, then research says you could then basically go sprint straight after, which would give you a potentiation effect, which is good. If you do like a full-on heavy gym training session, then I'll probably recommend either leaving it a good few hours or sprinting as fresh as possible. If you want to, basically, if you want to get as fast as you can, you need to be able to sprint fast. You need to be fresh. So ideally, we would say sprint, then lift. But again, it's all dependent on context. Simply, if you were doing a quick, short session, then you'd be fine to lift before. If you're doing a really big, heavy, long session, lift after. I think we're turning to sprint coaches here, guys. When sprinting, I feel one foot slaps the ground harder and sounds different than the other. Is it normal or is it a muscle imbalance? Potentially, it might be an imbalance. It could be, come and join us in September. We'll get you on Steve's magic force plates. You sprint through them, and we can see how much force you're putting through one foot and the other, the ground contact. And you may find that, potentially one leg and one ankle complex may be slightly weaker or stronger in comparison.
We wouldn't want to say you have an imbalance without seeing you sprint, right? So come in September, we'll analyze your force and we get you stronger, more powerful when you be running faster, and there'll be no slapping of one foot compared to the other.
Yeah. Any more questions? We'll see you there, Mark, I think.
Mark, you're on there.
Knee rotation. I mean, realistically, the knee doesn't rotate too much. It only rotates a few degrees when unlocking. I would argue why you're looking to train knee rotation. Again, it's a hard question to answer, but I wouldn't be putting a lot of force through the knee in a rotational aspect. You're more likely to stretch the meniscus as well as the supporting ligaments.
I think that's maybe also like isolating a certain muscle, right?
Yeah, I mean, the real one that kind of helps unlock the knee is a little muscle called the popliteus. Again, you can do, it's probably better to isometrically try and work that muscle a little bit, but I wouldn't be doing lots of isotonic movement work, trying to rotate the knee joint. You get more rotation from the hip. The knee itself doesn't really rotate.
I'm liking the questions, to be honest, though. So if you guys are
very good,
these are great.
Yeah, it's good. It's great fun.
All of these questions we can put into practice in the lab, so it's perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, Steve, this is definitely for you.
It's for Max.
Toe training.
Yeah.
As in training the TA, you know, not so much toe training, but there's lots of new studies coming out looking at training flexion. So Wes was talking a lot about triple extension, which is great. It's a lot of Olympic lifts, etc. So if you're kind of flexing the ankle rather than extending it, then you're working muscles like the TA that might be put under a bit of stress when you're concentrically contracting your calves. Your hip flexors take quite a bit of a pounding when you do lots of triple extension stuff, and obviously the hip flexors are really important with sprinting because of, like Mark said, how we're rotating the hip. And not sure what you mean so much with toe training, so I've just kind of changed the question and answered something slightly different.
Well, I can jump in quickly. With the toe, you need a level of flexibility to propel yourself forward. So if your toe isn't mobile, you're going to place more stress on the joint, and then some of that stress has to be dissipated somewhere else. So you're going to load up maybe the ankle more, maybe the knee, and you can go further up the chain to a hip. So this is why we're saying about the screening, the force platform, the cueing, all kind of links together in order to get the best out of your performance.
Go on, Mark, keep going. Dorsiflexion now.
How much do I aim to increase dorsiflexion without compromising ankle stiffness? Well, dorsiflexion is only between about 15 and 20 degrees maximum. There could be a number of things restricting it: tightness of the calf, tight Achilles tendon, tightness of the plantar fascia. You could have it's the talocrural joint, so you also could have a kind of bony abnormality that's affecting the dorsiflexion. I wouldn't push into pain. So if you are trying to increase dorsiflexion, it's painful, I would try to look into somebody trying to address that first and look into it. It can be muscular stiffness, or it can be kind of arthrogenic, i.e. the joint itself causing the stiffness. But if trying to push into it and it's causing discomfort, I would stop that and try looking at changing that first.
I'm just going to jump in quick on that ankle stiffness as well. Just things like your plyos, your ankling or your pogo exercises, fantastic for developing ankle stiffness. And as long as, like as Mark said, around the sort of the degrees of ROM at the ankle available, again, for sprinting, you want to be working anything between 15 to 20 anyway. So if you can work with that and still work on a good plyometric program, then nothing should be compromised in that ankle, and the Achilles area should be nice and sort of strong, stiff, to give you that, that elastic energy, basically what we want to utilize.
And if you've got good elastic energy, like with that stiff ankles doing those plyometrics, then when we talk about short ground contact times, high amounts of vertical force during your top flight velocity, then we're looking at someone having less than 100 milliseconds ground contact time. So having muscle stiffness, doing the plyometrics like Wes just said, is going to be key. The next one, I love it. Love this question. Smooth or stable when sprinting? So again, like we'll get you in, Jerry, we'll get you sprinting, we'll have a look at your biomechanics, your technique. But essentially, obviously, we want to be applying force in the correct direction. So as smooth as possible is going to be a contribution of the horizontal force behind you and vertical force below. When you start shaking between left and right, you're using force in a medial and lateral way, which is only going to be inevitable. If you have too much medial lateral force, you're actually wasting the resultant force. You're not putting into the correct direction in order to run as fast as possible. So people that start swaying, sometimes you see that when people are not maintaining their top flight as well as someone else because they're not in a good flow, and they'll be wasting force production going left or right, meaning they decelerate more, meaning they're not maintaining their speed and they're a less efficient sprinter. But it's all very much technique based, and it's cool that you're asking these questions because that's stuff that we can look out for and the sports scientists that we can do to improve.
Should a lot of emphasis be placed on sprinting on an empty stomach to reduce the interference of extra mass on acceleration, or does it not mind too much on how full you are? I am not a sort of dietitian, nutrition expert, but, you know, like most common advice, you're not going to have a big old heavy meal just before you go do something maximally, because chances are you might see it again.
We have nutrition modules where we kind of give advice for when you put on the correct fuels, and when's the most suitable time to eat, etc. I mean, I suppose we're talking about Usain Bolt, and there was lots of stuff about me eating chicken nuggets, etc. Which I think is probably fine. Like, he's done his training, but he wouldn't have done that straight before the race, right? So it's not going to be empty stomach so much, but the fuel's there before. Is that it, question-wise? I think we did really well there, guys. With those.
I think everyone just got a full degree there, haven't they? They've asked the questions, they've got the degree. Where should we send the certificates?
Well, thank you so much for that really insightful presentation and also that amazing Q&A. And yeah, thank you so much for supporting us today. And thank you to everyone who came. Hopefully we'll be able to see you in September. And I hope everyone has a lovely evening.
Cheers, guys. All the best.
Take care. See you soon.
Thanks, guys.